The competencies are becoming obsolete quicker and quicker, and therefore it's less about that and it's more about co-building the new competencies that we need for the new world. So all that was physical, of course, but it was creating connections between people who have problems and people who have solutions. So it was really around collaborative learning.
Hey, I'm Amanda, and I'm coming to you from 360 Learning. This YouTube channel is for learning professionals who want to have a business impact, so subscribe now. In this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Thierry Bonetto, former Global Chief Learning Officer of Danone, and he spent 20 years with the company revolutionizing the way that they handle learning. In our interview, we're going to talk about business issues, his take on collaborative learning, and a bit about his personal journey at Danone. If you'd like to get to a specific topic without watching the whole interview, we included timestamps below for each topic so you can skip ahead. Awesome, let's get right to it. Well, Thierry, thank you so much for coming here. We're welcome to pleasure to have you today. So to get started, could you tell us a little bit about your career at Danone and what your journey was like?
I started now about 21 years ago in Danone, and I spent 20 years, fantastic years, basically in two parts. First part, I was in charge of what was called competencies development for the group within the group HR department. And the second part, 10 years, in charge of learning and development for the Danone group.
Wow, okay. Very impressive. Could you tell us a little bit, you said the second 10 years learning and development, what change led to that for you to take on a more specialized role?
You mean in the 10 years as
when you took
as
the move,
Actually, I had started to work on L&D before that. So something that's I think I keep in my mind was the creation, if I can say that, of a kind of distinctive format of university, of corporate university, which we called Danone Campus.
Okay.
So I started with that maybe 2-3 years after I joined Danone, when I had been asked to think about what could be the right Danone University format. Was it going to be fully digital? Was it going to be fully brick and mortar? So what could be the elements?
Yeah. So what did you decide?
So I did quite a few benchmarks and reflection on what it could be, and then I proposed and launched a kind of moving campus. And the concept was very simple, and it's still happening today, and I'm proud because there are now other companies that are using also this model, which is good. So it's recreating, if you wish, a learning center somewhere in the world, so moving in different places of the world, close to Danone businesses, and creating this learning center for 1 week. And during this week, having training programs or seminars as if we were in a normal brick and mortar training center, so where people come, but also having plenary sessions, so having a COMEX member joining to talk about the group strategy, having guest speakers who could be, sports people, orchestra directors or others to provide insights or inspiration on, let me say, leadership and management. And also a lot of networking between people. So events with 300 to 400 people at the same time in the same week.
Wow.
With a lot of networking, because Danone was and is a lot about learning with and from others.
Right.
So that was a critical thing. We were organizing around 10 to 12 Danone campuses around the world every year. And it was an amazing story of not only competencies development, but also culture sharing and inspiration.
In new business models, what does business require of L&D and L&D of business to have an effective partnership? How can they work together in the best way?
It's a very good question, because often learning is not so much connected with business as I can see in different places, in different companies, and I think that is critical. My view is that from a business perspective, I can see at least two requirements to your question that are important. One is, and this is more important today, is the time to competence, the cycle time by which we can bring learning solutions to solve business issues or to help solve business issues or to bridge competencies gap. And in fact, probably the digital technology, the digital revolution is helping a lot, actually is accelerating a lot the distribution of new competencies. And the challenge that I think we still have is accelerating the design of solutions. So one, I think, is the cycle time, is how to be faster than before to develop new learning solutions and implement them. So that's one. And the second, I think, requirement or important point is having an impact.
And being able to show it, ROI of your investments.
Exactly, having an impact, some kind of impact. Because training people is okay, but what is the impact that is created? And there could be different kinds of impacts, but I think this is a key requirement of business. From a L&D perspective, a learning perspective, I think learning needs to be connected with business in a certain way, and not only be in HR. So in some ways, get out of HR as well. The way we are doing that, and we are doing that in Danone, is through learning and development committees. So Danone Academy has around 10 different academies per function, like marketing, sales, and so on. And for each of the academies, there is a learning and development committee that is composed of business people representing the function, ideally representing the function from a global perspective, like marketing VPs, and from a local perspective, like marketing directors, to bring the voice of the ground as well. And it is through those learning and development committee that we can define what are the competencies needed, what are the transformation programs that we need to put in place, and so on. So L&D, in that case, is first a facilitator of those business learning committee to agree on what is important for the business, to understand that, and then to put in place the appropriate program. So I think there is a requirement for L&D to have a kind of business governance to support the relevancy of what we do.
Okay, well, wonderful. So let me ask you this: how have you been able to show the real ROI of the business co-owning learning within Danone, for example?
Personally, I don't really like the ROI as such. I'm more talking on return on expectations. So what kind of impact do we expect from the learning programs, and how do we get that, and how can we measure this impact? It can be sometimes financially calculated, but not necessarily. For me, there is a first question behind that is, how do we make sure that people will, or most of the people, most of the participants, learners, will apply part of what they have learned, which is not a given, actually. So that's one element, how to make sure there is something that's going to happen in terms of behaviors, competencies applied to the context and to the business context. And for me, one of the critical elements to make that happen is the role of the manager, the team manager, the N+1 of the individuals. There are some research that you may have seen that shows that when the manager is really taking care of that, the impact is up to 30% higher.
Oh, wow, okay.
So not the learner, but the learner's manager is in some way responsible up to 30% of the impact.
To make sure that they're applying what they learned.
Exactly.
Okay.
So a consequence of that is, and it's not easy, it's involving the managers ideally upfront so that they know why their team member is participating to learning programs, and inviting him or her to really do something afterwards. There is a little tool, and then I'll come back to the ROI or ROE in a minute, but a little tool that I was using in some of the programs that I got from a guy called Charles Jennings, who is one of the founders of the 70-20-10 Forum. And he proposes to use a tool which is called the 505 tool for the managers, that says that take 5 minutes before your team member go into a program to discuss with him or her the objectives and what he or she will need from the training programs. That's the first 5. 0 means leave him or her alone during the program. Don't send mails or call, because learning is also working in some ways. And then 5, the third 5 is take 5 minutes after the program to identify what has been learned and how to apply that. I'm saying that because before measuring, we need to we need to make our best so that some of the learnings will be applied.
Taking it a little bit more to business specific, could you describe some key challenges that L&Ds to make L&Ds more efficient to train on business specific issues?
I think one key element for me, and maybe this is one of the most important, is that learning managers, in my view, L&D, should be first, let me say, performance consultants. So for me, the challenge is not to see ourselves as L&D as people designing programs and implementing programs, but people who are helping to develop performance for the business. And sometimes part of the answer lies in learning, sometimes part of the answer doesn't lie in learning. So sometimes L&D people need to say learning is not the right way to answer that. We need to work on something else. But I think the key challenge for me is really to be focusing on the impact as a performance consultant and not as a designer of program. Maybe the second challenge I would like to mention, but it's less linked to, it's linked to business in some ways, but the same, it's to create the conditions for people to learn continuously as much as possible.
Right.
And there again, it's not about designing programs. It's what kind of learning environment we can create within the organization to help people learn continuously.
Right.
In that case, the learning of the individuals and the people may not be directly connected with the business. That's why I was mentioning the link is less direct. But I think it creates an environment and a culture when we can and people can address new issues, new challenges more easily, because we have taken the habits of learning and addressing business challenges.
So the next thing I want to ask you about, so there's a saying here, could you tell us about the learn from others for others philosophy and how you've put that into place for learning for all?
For me, that was very important, and particularly very important in the Danone culture, which is a culture of proximity and of relationship between people. And we had quite a number of practices that evolved over time to help learn with and from others. We'll take some examples to be more practical. We launched a few initiatives around, Danone launched a few initiatives around networking, again, to support the cross-fertilization. I integrated on the Danone campuses that I mentioned a few of those initiatives and of those practices. I gave a couple of examples. One is what we called marketplaces, where there were people, let me say for instance, in supply chain, who had in supply chain developed very good practices, who were selling those practices virtually to their friends, professional friends from other business units of Danone. So it was organized really as a marketplace with stands, with checks, where people were buying or selling practices. And when people were buying practices, it was not real money, but their commitment was to actually put in place or adapt and copy this practice in their business units. So that's one example.
Wow.
There was another example that we use a lot on those campuses, that at some stage we were doing that in all the programs that we were running on campus, was a practice that we called message in the bottle. So the message in the bottle, it was invented by a friend of mine. It's called Benedict Benenati, who was at that time in Danone, and we used that in the campuses. It was the idea that in the room of the seminar, or sometimes we did on campus, bringing 3 or 4 seminars together with all the participants to do that. Everybody was identifying one challenge that he or she was having in his or her context, whatever, in HR, in supply chain, in manufacturing, in sales, whatever, and was putting those challenges on post-its with the shape of a bottle, hence the name bottle,
right.
Message in a bottle. And we're posting this bottle, like a bottle in the sea, on the wall. And then everybody was looking at all the bottle post-its who were on the walls, and the people who had encountered this challenge before and had found some solutions were putting their names on another post-it that was in the shape of a life vest and putting that near the bottle. So all that was physical, of course, but it was creating connections between people who have problems and people who have solutions. So it was really around collaborative learning. And then people were committed to discuss together so that those who had solutions could help those who had problems. So that's another example.
Yeah.
And then it moved to social networks, of course, doing a little bit the same, but virtually.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think this could be possible in a virtual environment?
Exactly.
Okay.
So doing the same. And when we launched the strategy that we called One Learning a Day to help move to a learning organization in Danone, we decided to build a learning platform connected with an LMS, but also connected with the social network of Danone at that time, to really make sure that the social network and the possibility of peer-to-peer connections was part of learning. So it was not only about registering to this or that face-to-face learning or e-learning or whatever. It was also connecting to the social network of Danone. So that was another example. And a fourth example I can give is at some stage, that was a little bit after, we started to design what we called learning objects. And the learning object, the objective of the learning object was to bring a piece of competence to a certain population. Like, for instance, marketing, how to do a brief for an agency. That's a piece of competence, how to do a brief for an agency for a product. So we were using video. I was a fan of video for learning. Combining sometimes an expert on marketing, in that case, talking about this topic, but also an internal person from Danone, expert or competent on the topic to do that. So a little video based on that, plus 2 or 3 documents, could be words, PowerPoint, whatever, which was, for instance, a template to build a brief for an agency. And all that was a learning object that could be brought to all the new marketing people in the organization. So at some stage, we built a program for new marketing people where basically those learning objects was some of the basis of their induction in marketing. So they could access to 10, 15, 20 learning objects with videos from internal and external experts and some tools or templates to do the job. So that's some examples of this.
Wow, okay. Well, those are really great examples. I think we're going to write some of those down, because that's the Meshel and Jabal thing is the first time I've heard of that, but it sounds, effective, but also really outside the box. It's very innovative.
Learning is moving from a paradigm where there is knowledge to transfer to people to a paradigm where we collectively co-build new competencies.
Right.
So in other words, many years ago, what I would call the old world, where we were looking at training, we were saying there are a number of knowledge that we need to transmit to people, and let's have those who know transfer their knowledge to others. More and more, the competencies are becoming obsolete quicker and quicker, and therefore it's less about that, and it's more about co-building the new competencies that we need for the new world.
Right.
And to do that, I think this notion of collaborative learning will be useful.
Right.
So I don't know where the balance will be, but that's one of the reasons why I believe a lot in this notion of collaborative learning.
Absolutely. It's less knowledge sharing and more knowledge creating together, and that's collaborative learning.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, Thierry, thank you so much for your time today. It's been lovely to have you. I think we've all really taken a lot and learned from you, and appreciate the time. This has been really great.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Who do you think we should interview next in this series? If you have someone in mind, let us know in the comments below. Okay, bye. See you next time.